with the Food Science Department at the University of Arkansas up on campus, and I've been to food science for a long time. I have experience mainly with fruit. My master's and PhD were in grape and wine production, and since then I've kind of expanded my fruit world to working with blackberries, peaches, table grapes, muscadine grapes, and so on. So in the past 5 years, I've been working with Dr. Clark on some blackberry research, having to do with basically looking at what happens after you harvest. And so that's my specialty is after you harvest the fruit, what happens, we do a lot of sensory workout where I work at Food Science. So what do consumers think about the blackberries? How do they hold up during storage? And so that's kind of been my focus. So we're going to talk about a little bit today about what consumers want in a blackberry, just from some of the research we've been doing at the university, the harvest parameters that we need for blackberries, because that's going to impact how you handle the fruit. Then the post-harvest handling of the blackberries, and at the end of the list, I have a list of sources that are pretty handy if you're growing blackberries and selling them in the commercial market. So we've already talked, I'm sure you all know the basics of the blackberry and its species, and really my link with Dr. Clark is, one of the more well-known breeders in the world, and having that opportunity here at the fruit station to do a collaborative project where you kind of go from field to people eating it. So just having that capability and collaborating is pretty handy. I'm going to talk a lot today about what the composition of a fruit is, and just to give you guys an idea of some parameters that are important when you harvest. If you were growing bananas, you would pick a banana green, and then it would continue to ripen and so on, and you would eventually be able to eat it. When you harvest a blackberry, that's when it's its best. And from there on, it's downhill. And the faster you get it cooled and shipped to where it needs to go, then the better it's going to be as a product. Also realizing some attributes for harvest, Brix is about the sugar level. How sweet is that fruit? And for blackberry, that tends to be around 8 to 12% or Brix, but that tells us how sweet the fruit is. Another important attribute with any fruit, and I've listed other fruits here so you can see how it varies between fruits, is the acidity. How sour is that fruit, or how acid is that fruit? And we think of a lot of people harvest just insoluble solids. But as it turns out, in terms of the consumer world, the acidity is actually more of a factor than the sweetness is. But most important of all to the consumer is that balance. How much sugar to how much acid? Because you can have high sugar, low acid food that'll be bland, or you could have a nice balance that'll be just enough sweet but just enough sour to make it a more exciting fruit. So you really need to think about that balance. So what do consumers want in a blackberry? So we at the university have done some collaborative work between the Department of Food Science and the Department of Horticulture. And what we were looking at was we're taking fruit and we're harvesting it, and we're measuring some things that are important to the fruit, like the sugar level and the acid level and that ratio or the balance. We may be also looking at the fruit size. Is that important to the consumer? It is to me, and it may depend on whether you're a UK person or if it's in a clamshell. The size of the fruit matters. How big is that berry? How much does it weigh? How many little seeds or pyrines are in that berry? And yes, I made my students count little tiny seeds in blackberries, and they are very good at it. And then we did some consumer and descriptive work and some surveys. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what a consumer study is. So in this particular study, we're harvesting blackberries here at the station, and we are going to, this happened all in 2014, we did 5 cultivars, Natchez, Osage, Ouachita, Primark 45, and Primark Traveler. And this is all floor cane fruit, not prime cane fruit. And then we did 6 of Dr. Clark's, what we call advanced selection. These are selections he's kind of think are doing pretty well, and we want to maybe go on and see how they're going to do. And we evaluated those attributes that were on the slide before this, and we also did some sensory on it. Now, for the attributes that we identify, we had nachos. How many of you grow nachos? It's a big old boy, right? So in terms of this group, nachos was the biggest berry. It had the most seeds. And in terms of the highest soluble solid acid ratio, we had Washington. So just to give a baseline, so what we like to do in food science is we like to see what the sensory stuff tells us compared to the analytical stuff, so we can really gain a lot of knowledge. So what is a consumer panel? All right, so we have a sensory science department in food science, and what they do is they have a database of people. It's like 5,000 people who are interested in coming and being consumers to taste whatever their sample. And they pay those people to come in. So you pay the consumers to come in anywhere between $20 and $100, depending on how long they're going to be there. And those people fill in a recruiting email. And the email will say, it'll give you an idea of whether or not you're going to qualify for this test. Because my first question on that qualifier is not going to be, hey, do you eat blackberries? Because everyone's going to say yes, because you want to come and get some money to taste some blackberries. So we'll recruit people based on blindly how often they're making purchases of blackberries, whether they eat blackberries, if they hate blackberries, we won't be using. And and those people come in and they taste the blackberry. And these are people that would normally be buying your products. So that gives us, instead of a scientist view, more of the consumer view. And what these people, the consumers, tell us is how much they like the product. So this is a consumer test. So I'm saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like this 0 being low, 9, 10 being high, whatever the scale. They're going to tell me what they like about that fruit, depending on what questions I'm asking. So in this particular case, we had 75 consumers that came in and tasted all of 11 of the blackberry genotypes that we were evaluating. Some of the things we were interested in was when they sit down. So they come into the booth, they sit down, and we give them a plate with 4 of the exact same blackberries cultivars, just one cultivar at a time. And then they go through the whole ballot and answer questions that I'm asking. When they're done, they get the next one. That's how they're answering the questions. So they're not getting all these blackberries at once and saying, ooh, I like that one because it's the biggest one, because that'll make them change their opinion about what it is. What we were interested in was, when you look at a blackberry, how much do you like its appearance? What do you think about its size, its shape, its color? And then when you eat it, what is your overall impression of that blackberry? And so in this particular case here, the winner for appearance and size was Traveler. If you know anything about Traveler, it's a medium-sized berry. Remember, Natchez was in this mix, but they tend to like the more medium-sized berry in terms of appearance. And when they got to overall impression, the berry they liked the most was a 2491, which had a higher soluble solids around 10, but it also had a nice acidity balance to it. And so that gave us a lot of good information. In general, this is the scale on the bottom here, what a consumer would see. If I ask them any of these questions, how do you like the appearance of this blackberry? Do you dislike it, or do you like it extremely? And they answer the question. In the case of almost all the blackberries we had, they were anywhere between a neither like nor dislike to like moderately or like very much. So in general, they liked the blackberries, and they were there close, and there were no major dislikes. So what we gained from this consumer study with all those analytical assaults is kind of the ideal attributes you're looking for in a blackberry that you're going to sell to consumers. So we want a berry weight from 8 to 10 grams. Okay, that's kind of a medium to medium large berry. Sugar level or soluble solids between 9 and 11%. A titratable acidity of about 1%. And that's a good balance. But in general, this balance between the sugar and acid should be somewhere between 10 and 13. And so that's what's going to be your sweet zone for selling your blackberries. Then more recently, in the last 6 months, we did a consumer study online. And so what that entailed was we sent out a survey online, and about 1,000 people started the survey, and the survey was pictures only and questions only, so they couldn't taste it because it was a lot of people and it was going out all over the U.S. but about over 800 people completed the survey. Did anybody here take a survey on Blackberries? Yeah? Okay, so you did. I did. So what it was doing, we had some questions that were in general, like where do you buy your stuff, how much do you pay for it. But one of the interesting things that we had were some photos. If you were at a grocery store and you saw these containers of Blackberry, which would you prefer to purchase? Because we had another study that kind of said, we don't like big Blackberries. But what we found here in this case is that almost 70% of the consumers in this online survey liked the look of this clamshell right here, 735, which looks, although the weights are the same, it looks, and some of the, you have to read some of the results and what they did in the comments, but it looks fuller. So it really wasn't about the berry size, it was more of how it looked in the clamshell. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then another interesting question that we asked was, of these 3 containers here, and we can't see it very well on the picture here, which of these 3 do you prefer? And how many of you know what red duplicate reversion is, where the duplicates turn black to red after you harvest them? So if you can look at the picture that I'm seeing here, you kind of see it right here. This has no red drupe. This has a little red drupe. You can see some here and here. And this one is just riddled with red drupe. So which one, if you're in a grocery store and you're sitting there looking at the shelf, which one of these are you going to purchase? And then, of course, they like 924. Okay, so that's interesting because we don't have any data that shows what the consumers think about red drupe. In general, what some of the things that they said in the comments were, this is less ripe, because they think the red means that it's not ripe. So they really are buying it maybe just because they're not sure if it's ripe. So that's pretty interesting. And those are just results that I've just gotten on those. So in general, for the online survey, we found that they like the bigger berries, how they look in the clamshell, and the berries that have less red drupe. And so we're going to talk more about red drupe. And I've got other results that are going to come. We just closed that survey, I think, in like May, so I haven't really dug into it yet. In general, the attributes that growers want in the fresh market is to be able to sell their product and make money. So that's the whole point of why you're growing your fruit. So what do you need to do to grow your fruit in order to have something a consumer will want to buy? So we're going to look at the harvest parameters. One of the things you need to consider in your harvest parameters is what your market is. If you're U-pick, you probably don't care about post-harvest storage because it's up to them however they're storing their product, right? So they're going to pick it, they're going to leave. So you like maybe bigger berries and berries with a good flavor. Now when you get to the local and even the long distance crops, you're going to want something that is fully ripe, shiny black, but it also has to hold up a bit in storage. And what are going to be those parameters that help you do that? And so that's kind of what we need to consider when we're looking at our post-harvest handling. I know there's going to be a lot of like changes happening with GAP in the next couple of years, but in terms of pre-harvest protocol, keeping the disease down is going to impact your post-harvest storability later. And then following the GAP protocols that you have for field and labor sanitation, cleaning your harvest lugs and cleaning your shed. Those are all basically places where your little contamination can occur. If you keep those clean and dry, because in Blackberry world, like moisture is not our friend, particularly rain or wet harvest. So what other decisions may impact your post-harvest storage? Well, you got to pick it when it's cool and dry. If there's any moisture on the berry, it's going to automatically decrease your post-harvest storageability. Fully black, that's shiny black stage. Limit the disease and damaged fruit that you're picking. Limit the handling, especially the rough handling of your fruit, so not picking and, throwing it apart into the clamshell or the picking bin. And then one of the key things about Blackberries is picking into the final container instead of having a transition container. If you pick straight into your selling clamshell, that's what you need to be doing to limit that one more step where you may have to pour it or dump it or move it. The type of container you pick into is important, particularly with the moisture. So the plastic clear bins are kind of ideal for blackberries rather than like the green molded containers that can hold moisture or pull up the leakage as well. You don't wash your fruit, you don't wash blackberries, and the key really to any post-harvest storage of any fruit is rapid cooling or keeping it cool or picking it cool. So the cold chain management is the key to post-harvest, increasing your post-harvest storage on any of your blackberries. So let's look at a little bit on the ripeness. On the full, you want full black color, no kind of red or green on there and glossy shiny. And again, you want to have the berries to detach pretty firmly, and you want to have a firm berry with a lot of flavor. And this firmness comes in very important. Some cultivars are a little softer than others, so they're a little more fragile. And we've done some research here on some of the cultivars that Dr. Clark calls crispy. And these are firm. They're not crispy like a potato chip, but they're crispy like an apple, maybe like a pomegranate seed. Has anyone ever had pomegranate seeds? You know that turgidity you have? That's kind of what they're like. These things hold up really great with this attribute. So the more firm the fruit is, but still ripe, the better it's going to be in storage. So in terms of post-harvest handling, as you lose the quality and the quantity of the fruit, you are losing money. So if you invest a little money into that part of your operation, you're actually going to gain money in the end because you're not losing profit or potential sales. And you want to start with the best fruit to go down that chain, because as the fruit goes on, it's not going to be as good as it was at the beginning. Typical shelf life on a blackberry stored in a cool environment is 5 to 21 days. But this depends on the variety, how ripe it was, how quickly you got it cooled, and your field conditions at harvest. This is an example of what the shelf life of a blackberry would be during storage. So blackberries that are cooled to 68 degrees, what do you think the temperature of this room is right here? Maybe 72 or something like that. Okay, it's about this temperature. They're going to last 1 to 2 days. Okay, 41, that's your refrigerator. Possibly if your refrigerator is working pretty good, 5 to 7 days. Closer to 32 degrees, you're going to get 14 to 20 days out of your blackberry. So it has to be as cool as you can without freezing. So having, I do a workshop with Penny Perkins, and she does a whole little, I've seen a little presentation on knowing how many of you have thermometers in your cold room that have been calibrated and you know they're working really good. Oh, you almost raised your hand, didn't you? You need to check. And also it's very important to have multiple thermometers in there, because different zones in your refrigerators have different temperatures. The closer to the compressor, it's much cooler than by the door. So you really need to have a couple of good calibrated thermometers, refrigerator thermometers, that tell you maybe the humidity and the temperature. Or recorders, because they have them now that have more advanced thermometers that have apps that connect to your phone, so you can kind of keep an eye on what's happening in the refrigerator. So any delay in cooling, you can lose 20% of the batch per hour. So the longer you delay that initial cooling, the more you're going to lose. So what's going to happen with blackberries during post-harvest storage? You're going to have decay, and you're going to have leakage, residue formation, and desiccation. And here's some examples. In terms of decay, you'll see mold growing on the fruit. The leakage is, where basically the drupelets are bursting and the red juice is coming out of them. You see some of the desiccation happening at the end of this little berry right here. And then these right here are red drupe formations in these particular the fruit. And we know just from that online survey that red drupe does impact how consumers perceive the fruit. So what are some steps that you can take that can really enhance your post-harvest storage? First of all, when you're in the field, it's 80 degrees in the sun and it's 70 in the shade. So just by pushing your fruit under the canopy until you're ready to pick it up, you just took a 10-degree difference right here on the coolers. So that is important. So then you want to get, your gators or however you want to do that and get them to the cold room. And you want to get the heat removed from the fruit as quickly as you can. Everybody has different farms and different levels of ability to do that. Some have more like room cooling, where you just have a refrigerator room of some kind, or a shed that's been converted into a refrigerator or something like that, where it's just kind of cooling the whole air. And then you can have forced air cooling. That's where you actually force air to blow through straight across. Yeah. And considerations on, your clamshell and your packaging is very important. This is an example of, they've squished all this stuff in here together. Well, the air can't get through any of these boxes, nor how they've packed them. So the middle of this pallet right here is going to stay hot longer than the exterior. So you need to consider, this is an example of, if you had forced air cooling, you would cool down the rows. Having separation between your piles or within your pallets is very important to cooling. So you want to have more something like this where you've got spaces between these lugs, plus maybe ventilation in the crates themselves. And you can see in some of the different clamshells, you have different ways to ventilate even within the clamshell. So in this particular case, you have to get through a box into a clamshell. So making considerations about what type of boxes you're using to store in your commercial environment and how that air can flow. So if air is flowing, then it's cooler. But if you've got it packed so tight and so well, then the stuff inside is just getting hot, staying hot, longer. And then I did want to end talking about different needs for cold room. We all have different types of farms and what we can afford, but you can have some pretty cool things that you can make for your on-farm storage. So you can take something like a crate, like a storage shed, or an old refrigerator. You can find those, the old walk-in coolers. You can find those and buy those used on whatever, eBay, Craigslist, and convert it into a cooler of your own. But what you would need to have if you're going to have a cold room is well-insulated doors and ceilings. So you have to make changes to whatever you buy. Railway cars is another thing that's being used quite a bit, and also those like storage bins from the boats. Sorry, the metal shipping things. Yeah. Those are kind of been very popular to convert into storage units. The refrigeration has to be able to be capable of what you're doing here. And just even having the whole unit in the shade makes it have to work less. So if you have a unit not out in the middle of your field in the sun, but covered under a patio of some kind, you're already reducing its ability to work or helping it out by having that. You also want to have the ability to move things around and stack things, and also you can see this one has a ramp, so that's handy. So you can use any kind of rolling your stuff up would be no problem. Here's some other railway cars, shipping containers. They use the motors and the generators, and then you can buy your own stuff. And then these restaurant and cold rooms that you can buy used that don't work anymore. Their cores are still good. It's just that you need to get a new kind of unit in it to fix it. So one of the things that when I work with Penny in North Carolina, she talks about a lot is this pack and cool. Basically, that uses this CoolBot technology a little bit. A CoolBot is this little bitty thermostat type thing that connects to an air conditioner. And the way it works is basically it tricks that air conditioner into working all the time so that it keeps it at a like 34 degrees rather than cycling on and off like a normal air conditioner in your house might do. So it's like you can see the cool dot here, hooked to the air conditioner unit. So what you can do is you can buy a trailer unit and build a unit that is a cooling unit. So for not very much money, you can build this. And if you go to this website, it tells you how to build one. So, and I think the cost is probably, including the trailer and the air conditioner and the cool bot, $5,000–6,000, which really isn't that much compared to buying a whole new refrigerator. So that's an example of that. But if you go to this website, you can look all about how to use the cool bot. So it's an inexpensive way to make a cold room. But what's interesting about this is it's portable. So you can move it around. You can actually buy the unit itself all made from this particular packing tool company, or you can make one yourself. But I like the idea that it's portable and that you don't have to have it on all the time. So you can just turn it off during the winter when you don't need it, and you can hook it up and use it in a field environment. That way, your cooling unit is close to your harvest facility or your harvest fields. And that way you would take that step back. Also another consideration, because I know Urban Mondragon was talking about this with his fruit, the transportation, like the gators and stuff, can be a real factor in how well those blackberries hold up because of how rough they can be. So depending on the suspension, that and how far you have to go, you can really, I mean, you've all driven in one probably, it can be a rough ride if you've got the stuff packed pretty heavy. It's kind of bouncing it around, and it's also considering how you're getting the stuff to the cold room. And then you need to maintain it. So you need to start, from the farm into the refrigerator truck to the storage units, and then maybe you're going to a storage unit to another refrigerated truck if you're transporting further away, and then on to grocery store. So what you don't want to do is have a lot of cold and hot things happen. And that would be making the post-harvest a little less. And then here at the end of the presentation, I think you got some examples of are some of the websites that have some technical information about it, and then of course that story cool information as well. So that's all for me.